Obviously, the topic on everyone's mind is that about an hour ago, we paused Beanstalk, and we we didn't do this with any pleasure, certainly, but we felt like this was for a couple different reasons. When you look at the cost and benefits, uh, it seemed prudent to take swift action. So, to give first a little history on how we've handled things like this in the past, because there have been to date 4 other instances where we've had to push code to fix bugs to the Beanstalk contract. And each time we announced it as soon as we made the push and explained the issue. And in all of those instances, while we were working on the fix, we never paused Beanstalk. And uh, just to restate, because this is important, and maybe we should have led with this, but Beanstalk is designed to run in a fully decentralized fashion. Today, Beanstalk is still in what we would call an infant stage. And when you're dealing with infants, they need a lot of neck support, and you got to hold their head. And for better or worse, there are still, to date, other than the issue that has become evident today, all of the other issues were on the order of 10,000 beans, give or take. And it could be a little bit more, it could be a little bit less. But in each of those instances, it didn't seem like it was a substantial amount of beans being misallocated. And therefore, instead of pausing, and you know, we debated whether it made sense to pause at that time, we decided, given the small magnitude, uh, we felt it was okay for us to work on the fix while there was the issue. And it's important to note that in basically, well, in all 4 of those other instances, there were much fewer beans being minted at the time we were aware of the issue. And the important thing to note is that the magnitude of the issue, or at least the extent to which it is realized, is largely a function of how quickly Beanstalk is growing. And in the past, we were made aware of those issues when Beanstalk was growing either much, much more slowly and consistently, or not at all. And that made it a much more comfortable environment to work on the fix without having to pause Beanstalk. In this case, and this makes the need to pause even more unfortunate. Uh, Beanstalk was growing rapidly uh, over the past day, certainly, and specifically over the past like 6 hours. And we were we were made aware of the issue around that time. And once we verified that there was something going on, given the magnitude of the beans that were being printed, and it seems like the magnitude of the misallocations on a wallet to wallet level, if Beanstalk goes on to mint 10 million beans in the next day, while this issue is not correct, we could be looking at, instead of 10,000 beans being misallocated like had been the case in the past, potentially million beans or more. And that seemed to us to be a significant uh, cost. Now, ultimately, the benefit of stopping that has to be weighed against, and we were sent at least one message uh, saying that they strongly disagreed with the decision to unilaterally pause Beanstalk given that Beanstalk is supposed to be decentralized. And we recognize that this is suboptimal. And ultimately, while we can recognize that the long-term goal is to have Beanstalk be 100% decentralized, have multiple development teams working on Beanstalk, have Beanstalk contracts running on independent blockchains, and have obviously have ownership privileges removed from Publius's wallet, so that no one has unilateral control over the Beanstalk contracts. But we would note that this unilateral privilege can be removed at any time by a BIP, and we are hopeful that Beanstalk continues to develop such a strong community, an active community around it, such that in the not too distant future that is possible. One thing that will go a really long way to helping alleviate these issues is getting an audit, and audits are expensive, as is evidenced by the two proposals, BIP 4 and BIP 5, which we've put drafts of in their respective channels, and have been receiving feedback from the community. And, we're going to hopefully make either one or both of those proposals in the next couple days, and get those audits going. Because getting Beanstalk audited by really high quality auditors, and Omniscia is fabulous and was very impressive to us, and Trail of Bits is the gold standard for smart contract audits, and really blew our socks off. We think will go a really long way to alleviating the need for some of these privileges. And obviously, these issues become more apparent as Beanstalk grows. And so, to some extent, Beanstalk has benefited from being small. And now, as it appears, Beanstalk is growing much more quickly, which in general is a great thing. These issues are presenting themselves in slightly larger fashion. And so, one thing we'll definitely be interested in is feedback from the community on the decision to pause it. The alternative would have been to propose a BIP deposit, which would have taken at least 24 hours to pass with a supermajority. And ultimately, that is, in 24 hours, that would have been a big issue potentially, and in terms of the magnitude of the misprint. So that was the choice, whether to propose a BIP to pause or to just pause it ourselves. And given how many beans were potentially being misallocated, given how quickly Beanstalk was growing today, we wanted to pause it. Now, just to talk a little bit about what we're thinking going forward, because the goal is to get Beanstalk unpaused immediately. And to that extent, I'm here, but Publius, usually there's two of us, two accounts live. Like, we're working our asses off to get this resolved. In general, the mechanism to the cause of this complexity, which has been the focus of all of these bugs that we've had to push, is that we want to make Beanstalk support automatic compounding. And so when you have farmable beans, we want farmable beans to grow farmable stock. And we don't want we don't want people to have to farm every season. And it's important to note that the original Beanstalk implementation supported 100% auto compounding, and there was no grown stock at all, which obviously everyone here is familiar with. Like, what's grown stock? It's a remnant of BIP 0, which had to be implemented because the cost to update your silo was increasing linearly over time, and based on the way we had originally implemented the code to facilitate automatic compounding without needing to farm any stock at all. And it ultimately led to way too high gas costs to update your silo to a prohibitive extent. And so that was why we proposed changing the model to grown stock. And since then, since making that change, where the you ultimately need to farm your grown stock, which grow from your seeds that you've already farmed. Uh, since we made that change, there's been a couple of issues, and to date they've all been very small, but uh, this one seemed to be uh, significantly larger, and so we wanted to make sure that if and it seems like there are going to be millions of beans minted in the near future. We wanted to make sure that that was done properly, and so just looking ahead a little bit, and then obviously we're happy to answer any and all questions. There are kind of two options. One is uh, we can temporarily make it so that uh, your farmable beans do not grow farmable stock. And again, that was the automatic compounding element that we left in so that there was still some sort of compounding uh, after BIP zero. And ultimately, what this will lead to is just your grown stock will accrue faster, and it'll in practice it will make sense for you to update your silo more frequently, which is obviously a pain in the butt given gas costs. Um, but that is a much simpler implementation, and it would facilitate us to get a working implementation, ready to go live in the next hour or two, like 100%, or at least tonight. In the next 6 hours, we could have it rigorously tested and ready to go. And another question for the community is whether we should just push the fix or an unpause or propose a BIP to unpause, which then would take 24 hours to be approved by stockholders. And so that's another thing we have to weigh here. And other than, uh, again, making it so that your farmable beans do not grow farmable stock, uh, in order to keep the mechanism as it works currently, that would require uh, a lot more work on our part just in the next couple of days to make sure that it's implemented correctly. And that would imply that Beanstalk is going to be paused for longer than a couple hours or a day, and that's probably not ideal in our opinion. But we are very uh, interested in hearing what everyone else thinks. So that's sort of what's going on. We just want to reiterate, we don't necessarily know that pausing Beanstalk was the right decision, but we are doing our absolute best to do right by our like the members of the community. And we felt like people, especially when Beanstalk was really starting to grow rapidly, we felt like it was wrong for there to be large misallocations to farmers. And maybe just a last note before we open up to questions is this doesn't, if we kind of think about where Beanstalk is before it was paused and after from an economics perspective, it will be in the exact same position, with the exception between now and when it's unpaused, there is an opportunity for potentially more people to buy or sell beans if they have circulating beans or want to buy beans with other assets. And so you could have some price discovery here, but given the discrete nature of the system and the way it progresses every season, we sort of have an expectation that a lot of that has already happened, at least on the sell side. And therefore, the only thing that could potentially happen is a little bit more demand for beans, which would just mean that once we unpause, the system prints a little bit faster than it otherwise would. But that seemed to us to be a marginal cost relative to potentially lots of bean farmers getting, uh, you know, po- like totally incorrect allocations during this growth cycle, and we really didn't want that to happen. So that was sort of that's a summary of our decision-making process, and we hope that it is acceptable to you guys, and if it's not, we will accept that as well and change our process going forward. And with that in mind, if anyone has questions, uh, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll try to get to everybody. I just sent you an invite, Bull Market.
Hi, yeah, I was. So, what exactly happened that led to the issue? Do you know? And then, secondly, I think that absolutely in this situation, you guys should be able to shut down, pause the Beanstalk because it's not at a point really where the rest of the community could have done anything to stop this quickly. But really, what I'm curious is what do you guys think led to this issue? What exactly was the issue besides the misallocation?
So one of the reasons we decided to pause Beanstalk is because we don't actually yet know exactly what is causing the issue. But the first thing that we wanted to understand was the magnitude of the issue, and it seemed to be, again, significantly larger than previous issues. So we basically, as soon as we verified that there was an issue and it was likely much larger than previous issues, we decided to pause. And now we're digging deeper into the cause, and we will certainly be providing more information in the near future. But in general, it's a continuation of the other issues where we've had to push bug fixes to the contract. This one just happened to be of a larger magnitude. And just to be clear, um, and we're happy to go into more detail into the structure of the contract, but speaking at a detailed level is probably not the most constructive thing at the moment, because that would require us to sort of walk through the entire mechanics of the Beanstalk contract, and that would take an extensive amount of time, and that's probably not the right setting for this. And for that, we would also want sort of all of us to be here to make sure that we were giving everyone sort of a complete breakdown. But if and we're happy to do that, at some point in the near future if people feel that's appropriate or desired.
All right. No, thank you. Again, I think we're all invested in this, and ideally, the situation would get fixed, and there doesn't really seem to be a way that it would get fixed without you guys stepping in and pausing it. So, no, I appreciate what you guys put together here.
Thank you for your question, and thank you for your support. We really appreciate it, and we are committed to fixing this as soon as possible. Dumpling.
Hey there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. How are you?
I'm well. So yeah, I guess I would just I respect the decision, of course, to pause the Beanstalk, but I think it would be just because we're starting to get momentum. I think probably it not being paused for trying to minimize the amount of time it's paused. That would be my biggest concern. Is just try to solve the problem. We can always give a breakdown later and should try to just push the fix as soon as possible, as soon as you guys think is reasonable. That would be my input.
We appreciate any and all input from the community, and we would just reiterate the trade-off there is there would be a slight modification in functionality, and to date we have not pushed any changes in functionality as a Publius push. All of those have been through a BIP. But if we propose it through a BIP, even if it passes with a supermajority, it will take 24 seasons to be approved. And candidly, that's something we should probably revisit in terms of the governance mechanism. We're all learning here in practice. But in general, that's just an explicit trade-off we would want to highlight as people continue to weigh in.
Last thought on this would be, in this case, would we consider, how would we feel about a snapshot vote, just to reduce the amount of time? Maybe
we
other
were
people
drafting
could
a snapshot proposal, but then class started and we obviously didn't want to be late.
Maybe in this case, other people could chime in to see if they think a snapshot proposal would be sufficient, or if we should do a bit. And then we could, maybe if we think we have a quorum here, as far, maybe we could decide if a snapshot is good or if a BIP should be used, and the various trade-offs. I'll hop off the stage now.
You can also feel free to hang out if you want. Like, everyone's welcome to come up here and participate.
I think to Dumling's point, maybe even just a quick snapshot just to proceed, and then maybe later on a BIP if we really need to rectify it. I think that's a good thought, Dumpling, because I think we all want to obviously make the adjustment as soon as possible. And then Publius, I was wondering too, just because I know that before this all happened, I'm sure we all saw the big liquidity push, and I think someone just clarified in the general thread that it wasn't just a liquidity push, there was also some sewing on top of it. My only thought and or concern is if that now beaner, farmer, siloer joined the protocol and this all happened and then it froze, my only concern would be if that obviously was a red flag, and in turn a larger liquidity withdrawal, and then in turn the potential for another start of a debt cycle. And so I don't know if there's a way, outside of Discord, for us to kind of provide notification or something like that, or if it's even needed, just to kind of, keep tempers calm. I think within the Discord channels, we've been trying to have a lot of conversation around it, but obviously this is just one avenue for conversation.
Candidly, yeah, you're totally right. This sucks. This totally sucks. And we want to get it back up and running as fast as possible. And we acknowledge that this sucks.
Well, I got called up on stage, so I guess I'll speak. Thanks for addressing all these concerns, Publius. Thinking about whether or not doing a BIP or a snapshot, which would allow us to stop stock to pause Beanstalk, and in the meantime, we would continue running Beanstalk as if you hadn't executed your executive privilege. As far as the solution goes, is working on the somewhat acceptable short-term fix, which would be pushed within the next 6 hours anyway. And then you would be working on the optimal fix, which you think is going to take a few days. So
honestly, if we did the quick fix, we would then reevaluate. We would then kind of ask the community whether they want that mechanism or whether they would prefer we spend time kind of working on continuing to add functionality to Beanstalk, because it is a marginal cost. And this was sort of like a good, better, best. We wanted no one to have to transact with Beanstalk to compound their stock automatically anytime. And then once it was live, it became impractical due to gas costs. And accordingly, this problem has sort of manifested from there. But this is certainly not something that this wasn't in the original version, and it's sort of we've been playing catch up since then, and we can nip the problem in the butt by disabling the feature. But it's a question of what people would prefer. So in the short term, we can disable the feature and get it live. And then it's a question of, should we spend 2 weeks of dev time internally adding the feature back correctly this time, or should we, in a similar amount of dev time, we could do a lot of other things. So there's an opportunity cost to everything, and we're at the service of the community. So we're very interested in hearing where people think we should be spending our energy.
Thank you for clarifying that.
And Publius, sorry, I'm just a little scatterbrained myself, but if in terms of removing the feature, can you just reiterate again what that would actually look like for us on the protocol side, on I guess on the UX side?
So the short answer is on the UX side,
Please, I think we lost you. Oh, we really lost you.
Oh, yeah, that was a bold choice.
Well, while we've lost him, maybe we should just chat a little bit amongst ourselves until we get him back. Would people? It sounds to me like maybe we should just try to get a snapshot vote up, just so that we can quickly get the train back on the rails, and then they can take their time to work on this new feature. Well, what do you guys all think? Let's chime in one by one, perhaps, and then we can decide if we should do a snapshot vote or a bit.
can everyone hear me?
Publius, you're back. You're back.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yep.
All right, thank goodness. It's one of those like moment of truth. Where did I go? It was horrible. But we were able to get it back up. We apologize for that. This is just a bad technology day on our end, I guess. So the only change in functionality is that currently, when you have, right now, your farmable beans have farmable seeds and farmable stock. And those farmable seeds are growing more farmable stock every season. Currently, if you have not farmable seeds, if you just have seeds in your wallet, those seeds are growing grown stock. So there are two different seeds. There's farmable seeds and there are seeds in your wallet. Currently, the farmable seeds yield stock that is automatically compounded. Currently, if you have seeds that are not farmable, so just normal seeds, those are yielding grown stock, which is not auto compounding and needs to be farmed. So the difference is the amount of grown stock would increase because now your farmable seeds would start yielding grown stock as well instead of yielding farmable stock, which is yielding interest at that time, if that makes sense. So it would just decrease the extent to which Beanstalk is compounding a little bit further. Now, we would reiterate there is still a compounding element where any beans that you earn, farmable beans, get farmable seeds and farmable stock, and that farmable stock is earning interest. So there is still a compounding element to it. It's just a step down in the compounding. And honestly, as we explain it to you now, it doesn't seem like that significant of a marginal cost. And, it probably does make sense to remove the feature for now and revisit it, in the future. Or, I mean, we're adding a lot of talent to the back end Solidity team. We're hoping to make some proposals to do that in the very near future. And that will really help us, look into adding this feature back, and also maybe allowing us to spend more time on this feature if people really felt like it was important, or maybe trying to, there's a lot of different ways that we can play this, but at this point in time, it does seem like a marginal cost, and it probably is best to get it up immediately. But we're thinking about this in real time along with all of you, and considering your feedback.
While you hopped off there, Publius, I brought up to the community and said maybe everyone should just chime in one by one what they thought, just very quickly, and then we could maybe make a decision. I certainly side with you that removing the feature for now and just getting everything back up would make a lot of sense. But I wonder what everyone else thinks.
I'm on stage, so I'll just chime in too. If I was at this point worried about the control that you have over the Beanstalk protocol, I would have already been organizing a BIP to take that control away from you. So, I mean, and if someone, is going to complain about it now, I wish they had kind of noticed. You've mentioned it pretty much in every announcement and had said something earlier, so we could have planned around these contingencies, is all I'm going to say. I'm fine with the situation and the way you've chosen to handle it.
Could you just restate that one more time? We didn't quite follow. What would be the alternative action you would have taken?
If I had a problem with the authority, I know that right now that you can basically, I don't know how the mechanics work, but Publius can submit the contract owner or the original contract deployer can submit a BIP and make changes unilaterally right now, and that at some time in the future, and at some point in the future, you expect that privilege to be revoked. If I had wanted to revoke that privilege, not choose this moment right now to suddenly care about it. I knew you had that privilege. Aware of it. I've been thinking, well, at some point that privilege needs to be revoked, and now is not necessarily the best time to be making leadership shuffling decisions when we're in a crisis. If we want to change the way the community is organized, it's better to do that when we're in a lull. That's just my opinion. Like, we're in a crisis right now. It's not exactly the best time to start changing. See.
We appreciate that feedback, AJ. P3 Shoe, welcome up here.
There, just thinking about the lens of potential users and future adopters of Bean, I think it might be interesting to remove the feature and keep it live, because I do think it is a marginal feature, and I agree with your assessment there. So I just wanted to that was my 2 cents of trying to think of future when history looks back here. I think keeping it online is important unless it's a critical issue. That's just my 2 cents. But good luck, and thanks for keeping a level head through all this.
Just to clarify, you're saying you think that in the short term it makes sense to take the feature away to get it back up and running, but you agree that in the long term this is a valuable thing, and we've been fighting the good fight, to say.
Yes, I think in the short term, I think being up network is important. In the long term, I feel like this will be valuable, and maybe we should let the community decide. But I don't think this is worth the network being down over, and I'm curious other people's thoughts there.
Yeah, I'm actually on the same page as P3. It sounded like P3 was actually suggesting as well to just keep it running in the back end and removing it from the front end to start Publius. But to echo AJ's point, I mean, you've actually made it abundantly clear for anyone that is a newcomer within the past 24 hours or 48 hours, even the past week, they may not have heard you say it, but you've definitely made it clear for a long time that you guys are looking to kind of pull Publius away from this quote unquote executive decision maker that you're in, and obviously make it much more decentralized. Again, it's been very clear from a lot of the conversation that anyone that might be new may have not heard, but any conversation you would have heard in the past classes, that's clearly the goal of what we're trying to get to. But given the urgency of it, it makes sense. I think keeping it live and then passing a snapshot per Dumpling's recommendation is a great idea. And I actually also follow your lead on this as well, Publius.
I really appreciate that, and ultimately, it does seem like the community has grown a lot over the past week, and this isn't a great first impression. So, J-Dubs, you've been a long-time community member, so we appreciate that. And we are very serious about the importance of removing this executive control from Publius for a lot of reasons. It's ultimately a vulnerability to Beanstalk. And the real question is you have to weigh the benefit of being able to step in and pause or fix the situation in a matter of hours at this stage of the game before Beanstalk is audited versus not having that ability and not having the the vulnerability and the centralization of having one wallet but potentially able to modify the contract unilaterally. So we couldn't agree more, and we're that's like our main, from a macro perspective, that's our main focus, is getting Beanstalk to a place where it is sufficiently decentralized and has a sufficient community that's deeply invested in Beanstalk and its long-term health, that there are other, that it's not necessary for the contract owner to be able to unilaterally modify the contract, and B, when there are issues like this, it will be more than just Publius who's able to fix it. So this is still very, again, Beanstalk's incredibly young. It's doing amazing things, but it has issues, and we're trying to fix them as quickly as they come up. And we understand that this totally sucks, and we're going to try to fix it as soon as humanly possible.
Hedge.
To Mickey's point, I think getting
Able to hear me?
Sorry.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to echo a lot of the community members earlier had stated that they prioritize just getting things back online, and I know that's going to be the probably where we spend most of tonight's conversation. But what I wanted to see is, if there's time, I was really excited to see how much it's grown recently, and I wanted to know if you'd be able to comment on how Beanstalk was handling everything from like a weather perspective, a debt level perspective, and it'd be interesting to know if there's any surprises, or has everything pretty much been behaving as expected?
So, what an incredibly welcome reprieve from the current conversation. Maybe we can do a couple walkthroughs of some of the charts on the site, because Beanstalk has been going through a lot more growth recently, and it is very interesting to see how it's handling it. And in general, it's all incredibly exciting. And just to restate, we're not big fans of. We don't want to make statements on our subjective opinion about the state of Beanstalk. But obviously, it's important for us to comment on how the system is behaving. So, without venturing into the land of giving any sort of financial advice, there is sort of a couple of things that we look at and are, very pleased by the extent to which Beanstalk is growing. So, if everyone just pulls up the website and heads down to the charts area, I think obviously the undertone in all of this is the price chart, which, if we go, I think probably the best time horizon for this analysis is a month. And so if we start with about a month, you can see that over the past 10 days or so, there's started to be larger oscillations above $1. And the first question when you see larger oscillations above $1 is, well, how quick are the oscillations below $1? And one of the things to compare is what happened in the last growth cycle, which was more of a pump and dump, whereas this does seem to us to be much more organic growth in the community, is the length and specifically the debt level. So during the first growth cycle, there was no outstanding debt, and accordingly, when the price went too high, there was basically no supply available once the circulating supply was was exasperated. I'm losing my mind here today, guys. Once it was exhausted. There we go. So once the circulating supply was exhausted, there was no sellers effectively because of the 24-hour withdrawal time coupled with the season of plenty, which because there was no debt, immediately once the price was above 1, the rain started and the 24 season timer started. So there was no reason to withdraw because you would have lost out to the SOP. And accordingly, there was no sell pressure. So that growth cycle lasted about 10 days or so. And it's important to note that this growth cycle has already lasted a similar amount of time, but at the same time, it's been a much more moderate growth in the sense that it's had multiple returns to $1 without a season of plenty. It started to pay off a lot of debt, which is generally a very positive sign towards Beanstalk being able to generate a strong credit history. And specifically, the thing that you would look at and say, well, is this a pump and dump or is this sustainable? Is the soil. And so last time there was no debt and there was no soil. There was no debt because there was no soil, and there was no soil because Beanstalk had already been sort of growing steadily at that point and hadn't gone through a mini debt cycle at that point. And so at this point in time, because there is so much soil and so much debt, we actually have a nice way for the system to continue to deleverage. And that has evidenced itself by the price returning to 1 without a season of plenty multiple times. So the last thing we would say is because there's so much soil, or there has been so much soil, like there was a 90 ETH sow today, which is probably the largest transaction, certainly since the pump and dump. And it was just a sow. So it's not like that was a deposit in the silo that can be withdrawn immediately and dumped. Instead, those are pods that are going to harvest in the future when Beanstalk has a $300 million plus market cap and will be in a very different situation. So just looking at the price chart, there's a lot of there's a story here that is very exciting. And not to be sour, but to be honest, that is one of the reasons why it sucks so much that there's this issue, and we hope to get it back up and running immediately so the fun can resume. The next thing we would look at, which is very encouraging, is the liquidity. And separate from the actual liquidity in the liquidity pool, which is a little bit skewed because of the high price, what would be an even better metric for that is if you look at deposited LP in the silo, and that has started to increase significantly as well over the past couple of days. And in part, that is from people basically taking their harvestable pods and converting it to LP. So that's leveraging the efficiency of BIP2 in order to take your harvestable pods and turn them into LP, which lowers the price and increases the liquidity, which increases the speed at which Beanstalk is growing. So it's exciting to see that people who are harvesting their pods are mainly reinvesting in the field, reinvesting in the silo, or selling above 1. We've seen very little harvesting and selling below 1, which is all generally positive in terms of looking at, well, is Beanstalk entering a growth cycle or entering a debt cycle? It seems that things have shifted in a more positive direction. And then obviously, if you look in the field and at the harvested pods, that's where you start to see a real growth over the past month that has ticked up over the past week. So that's all super exciting for us, that Beanstalk is starting to demonstrate that it's a good place to lend money. And, that's reflected in the rapid growth of the pod line as the pods have been harvested. So it's the start, hopefully, of a positive feedback loop. And obviously getting Beanstalk back up and running immediately is important to making sure that the positive feedback loop continues.
Awesome, thanks. That was really encouraging, and it's great to hear that there is fix that would be able to, get Beanstalk back up and running. And I don't think from what it sounds like, that fix would impact any of these, positive developments that we've seen recently.
We appreciate your contributions to the discussion, BMAC. If anyone else has anything they want to add or ask or comment, feel free to raise your hand. We'll definitely keep this going at least another 10 minutes. And maybe, if there's no other questions, use this opportunity to do a little other housekeeping or answer any other questions that are not related to the pause. But if anyone has anything else they want to add, feel free to raise your hand. So I guess where we'll end the conversation on that front is just to say we will write a snapshot proposal laying out the two options, but it will be very difficult to do justice to the extent of the analysis we're able to give in long form by speaking, especially given that we want to be all hands on deck testing this fix and getting it up. But we totally agree it's essential to get input from stockholders, and we'll make a short proposal that is a rough outline of just the important changes and the implications. And we would just ask that those of you that are here, can help answer questions for those that were unable to come, and hopefully we can have a high level of voting on the proposal, so we can all feel like this is being decided upon in a more decentralized fashion than the pause was implemented. But obviously, it's good, better, best, and at this point we're trying to do our best, but we're gonna make sure that at the very least the way we do this is good. And over time we hope that this process gets a lot better, but obviously, this is still very early. So with that, if anyone has anything else they wanted to talk about other than this, or if you changed your mind and wanted to talk about this as well, feel free to raise your hand.
Before we end, let me know, and I'll talk about what I'm going to do afterwards. Let me know before we end.
Thanks, Publius, for hosting this discussion. I'm new around here, but intuitively, I think your explanation makes a ton of sense for pausing it. I'm curious, I know this is probably not the headspace you're in at the moment, since you don't know exactly what the issue is, but in the future, one day, I'm curious what you think, what conditions would have to be true, or maybe it's a broader question for the community also, for a BIP to be proposed and passed that would remove these unilateral privileges.
That's a great question. And step one would be getting Beanstalk audited, and hopefully having it audited by multiple parties. And in that spirit, we have two drafts of proposals for two independent audits. We're hoping the community will approve, and we think that will go a long way to at least facilitating that discussion. At that point, I think the main question that should decide it is effectively, the main test of any open source decentralized protocol with money on it is how resistant is it to attack when there's value on it. And on the one hand, there are technical exploits, which is what we hope the audit will find. And on the other hand, there are economic exploits that can come about if there's an improper integration. And in most cases, an improper integration would probably affect the protocol that is doing the integration directly. But in certain instances, it could also either directly or indirectly affect Beanstalk. And so these types of these types of considerations are an open discussion and things that will make us feel much more confident that it's appropriate to relinquish these privileges would be that there's a lot more value on the Beanstalk platform, therefore making it a much higher value target, and therefore, in theory, over time should demonstrate it's much more resilient, and more immediately, hopefully, having multiple independent audits performed on Beanstalk will at least make it reasonable to start to have that conversation about what is the right amount of value on Beanstalk to potentially do that. But we, like we said, we really want that to happen, and one of our main overarching goals is getting Beanstalk to a place where that can happen. And we hope it's evident in our conduct across the board thus far, but we think that doing things the right way, the best way to put Beanstalk in a position to become the behemoth decentralized protocol that we want it to be. But in the short term, that does require a little bit more head holding and neck support. And, we're happy to provide it in the short term, but we totally recognize that that's not what the optimal situation is. And we're committed to getting Beanstalk there.
Awesome. Thanks. That makes sense.
Anyone else?
And actually, AJ, just after you wrap up, I'm going to say one other piece too. Okay, AJ, I'm gonna. This is a little off topic. Actually, it's just related to other BDPs, which are considerably less relevant, frankly, than what we're talking about. But there was a little chatter, which was kind of baby talk compared to what we're going through. All the interesting stuff today. I threw up a different BDP today for looking at Bean NFTs. I've been working on it actually for a couple of weeks and just didn't have a chance to kind of finally formalize it. Not directly competing against Where Have You Been, who I've not seen in the chat. Definitely just trying to put more timeline and clarity around actual deliverables to help the team the community feel a little bit more confident of where we're going, how quickly we're going to get there, and what the output will look like. I realized his is nearing completion in the next 24 hours, and this one's just started. And so we're going to loop back and talk about what it would look like. But in the meantime, that one is listed. And yeah, so he and I are going to discuss if there's some kind of overlap, but I just want to bring it to your guys' attention that it's listed up there. So worst case scenario, we have more clarity there is basically no worst case scenario. I think we're just getting more clarity on where we're going with Bean NFTs. And there's just another BDP to represent that direction. So completely tangent of what we've been talking about.
Thank you. AJ, maybe you want to close this out, and then we'll make maybe just a quick closing remark.
If we're wrapping up, then I'll just say, so yesterday I taught a class I tried to teach a class on the introduction to frequency analysis. We can use that to help improve Beanstalk. Some technical difficulty. A lot of people came. If you were one of the people that came, thank you for coming. I do believe it's important. I've been busting my butt to produce this material. I had technical difficulty yesterday, and it was the first time doing that. I've basically written a textbook. I mean, not a textbook, but I've created a large document that included the graphs and math that I wanted to show, as well as the concepts. So I'll be distributing that. There's going to be a class in this again after this. I forget what we call this DAO talk. Yeah, the university class. There'll be another talk about frequency analysis, and I'll be supplying the documents I've written for materials for the class, and then probably tomorrow I'll submit materials for people's review in the chat generally. So I just wanted to say that. And if you're interested in learning about how different ways we might be able to improve Beanstalk or different ways to look at Beanstalk from a technical standpoint, just come to. I'll be in the barnyard after this university class because that's where I handle these community classes. And thank you for the people who came yesterday. Done.
Unless we'll give it like 10 more seconds if anyone wanted to raise their hand or add anything else. Otherwise, we'll just close this out real quick and kind of set an agenda for what you guys can expect from us in the near future. So no hands. So we're working on getting the short-term fix, which is would basically mean that your farmable beans do not yield farmable stock. They yield grown stock, which again we think is a marginal change, and the benefit is getting beanstalk back up, hopefully immediately. And so we'll propose a snapshot proposal, which is either going to be a binary, or maybe have 3 options, which will be whether or not to do the grown stock, farmable stock change through Publius's ownership privileges, to do it through a BIP, which will take 24 hours, or to leave Beanstalk paused until we can return to the current mechanism, and kind of see what stockholders want. Obviously, from this call, it seems like the first option is most likely, and we would support that. But we recognize that it would be better to do that with community support. So we're going to get a brief snapshot proposal up shortly, and we'll let everyone know when that's up, and we'll go from there. Last thing we just want to say is thank you guys for coming and discussing and asking questions and voicing your opinions. We understand that this sucks, and we're working to make sure that it gets fixed as soon as possible, and in the best way possible for the community, with the long-term interest of Beanstalk in mind. And we appreciate any and all feedback, including criticism that we are doing things improperly, perhaps especially criticism that we're doing things improperly. So we encourage people to continue to voice their opinions, both in discussion. Maybe we'll open up a channel to discuss the pause and the pause proposal, and we'll do that right now, and hopefully everyone can kind of direct their conversation there, so we can have a concentrated place to address all of this. So thank you everyone for coming, and we're incredibly grateful for what's going on with Beanstalk and this opportunity to build something that can really change DeFi and change the world. And we're sorry that there's this issue, but we're going to make it, we're going to fix it and get this thing back on chugging. Thank you guys for coming, and we'll talk soon.